What if the most dangerous force in mythology was never monsters, never war, never the wrath of gods, but women who refused to stay within the roles written for them? Not because they were evil, not because they sought destruction, but because they existed in ways the world could not control. And so, the stories changed. Or rather, they were changed for them. Because mythology, like history, is not just a collection of events. It is a lens, a narrative shaped by those who tell it. And in many of the myths we've inherited, that lens is unmistakably male. It defines curiosity as disobedience, beauty as danger, agency as betrayal. And when women step outside these invisible boundaries, the story does not ask why. It punishes them for it. Take Pandora. She is often remembered as the origin of all suffering, the one who opened the jar and unleashed pain, disease, and death into the world. A simple story, told as a warning. Curiosity leads to ruin. But look closer, and the narrative begins to fracture. Pandora did not create the jar. She did not create the contents within it. She was given both by the gods themselves, crafted, shaped, and sent into the world as part of a divine plan, and then blamed for following her nature. What does it mean to condemn someone for curiosity when curiosity is exactly what they were designed to have? Pandora becomes less of a villain and more of a scapegoat, a vessel through which humanity explains suffering by placing it on a single, controllable figure. And not just any figure, a woman. Then there is Medusa, perhaps one of the most misunderstood figures in all mythology. Today, she is remembered as a monster, a creature with snakes for hair, whose gaze turns men to stone, a symbol of horror, something to be feared and ultimately destroyed. But that is not where her story begins. In earlier tellings, Medusa was not born a monster. She was transformed into one, and not for cruelty, not for ambition, but as a consequence of violence inflicted upon her. Punished not for what she did, but for what was done to her. Her beauty, once admired, becomes the very reason for her downfall. And then, her transformation becomes justification for her destruction. The narrative shifts in a subtle but powerful way. Instead of questioning the injustice, it reframes her existence as the problem. Medusa is no longer a victim. She becomes the threat. And in doing so, the story resolves its discomfort, not by addressing the violence, but by erasing its context. Beauty, in this sense, becomes a curse, not because it holds power, but because it invites control, envy, and ultimately, punishment. This same pattern echoes in the story of Helen of Troy. Known as the face that launched 1,000 ships, Helen is often portrayed as the catalyst for the Trojan War, a woman whose beauty brought kingdoms to ruin. But again, the question is rarely asked, did she choose this role, or was it assigned to her? In many versions, Helen is taken, abducted, claimed, or manipulated by forces far beyond her control. Yet the war that follows, the destruction of cities, the loss of countless lives, is placed at her feet. Her beauty is not simply admired, it is weaponized. And then, she is blamed for the damage it causes. Helen does not start the war, but the narrative needs her to, because it is easier to attribute chaos to a single figure than to confront the complexity of human ambition, pride, and conflict. And once again, that figure is a woman whose defining trait, her beauty, becomes both her identity and her burden. And then we arrive at Clytemnestra. Unlike Pandora, Medusa, or Helen, Clytemnestra is not remembered as passive. She acts. She decides. She takes control of her story in a way that cannot be easily ignored. And for that, she is perhaps judged even more harshly. She is remembered as the woman who murdered her husband, Agamemnon, upon his return from the Trojan War, a symbol of betrayal, of vengeance, of something deeply unsettling. But what is often overlooked is what came before that act. Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter, Iphigenia, to secure favorable winds for his journey to war. He chose ambition over family, power over love. Clytemnestra's actions, then, are not random. They are a response, a reaction shaped by grief, anger, and a demand for justice in a world where justice was never meant to include her. But mythology does not frame it that way. Instead, her agency becomes her crime. Her refusal to accept suffering silently becomes her defining flaw. She is not seen as a mother avenging her child, but as a woman who stepped too far beyond her place. And this is where the pattern becomes undeniable. Pandora is punished for curiosity. Medusa is punished for her beauty. Helen is blamed for desire she did not create. Clytemnestra is condemned for action she dared to take. Different stories, different outcomes, but the same underlying structure. A system that transforms traits into transgressions. A narrative that turns complexity into cautionary tales. A mythology that does not simply reflect society, but reinforces its expectations. So the question remains, are these women victims or architects of their own fate? The answer is not simple, because within each story lies both truth and distortion. These women are shaped by forces beyond their control, but they are also active within those constraints. They are neither purely innocent nor purely guilty. They are human in the most profound sense, complex, contradictory, and impossible to reduce to a single role. But what is clear is this: the way their stories are told reveals more about the storytellers than the subjects themselves. Because when curiosity becomes sin, when beauty becomes danger, when agency becomes betrayal, it is not the women who are being defined. It is the boundaries placed around them. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: these myths were never just about gods and heroes. They were about control, about shaping behavior, about teaching generations what is acceptable and what is not. So the next time you hear these stories, ask yourself not just what happened, but why it was told that way. Because somewhere between the lines, between the silences and the exaggerations, there is another version of these women. One not defined by punishment, but by perspective. And that version is still waiting to be heard.